Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. I hope everyone's is connected and ready. As we're waiting for people to tickle in with the start with the start of the hour, I'd like to welcome everyone. Welcome to the first community development activity of the year. We're very happy and very excited to start the year with such an interesting community development activity. So I don't want to talk much, but we do have a couple of introductory slides. So I'll just start with a couple of slides to introduce the session and start the presentation off. So today's session is Understanding Open Infrastructure, Why It Matters and Why It Needs Funding. So just to start off, I'm sure by now you're all aware of Zoom, but just in case, I'd like to remind you that Zoom does have a lot of features. You can minimize the screen and move it around for a better view. If you find that a speaker is talking at a faster pace, you can do the raise hand option and just send a message to slower the tone. And if you have any technical Zoom related questions, if you can't hear, if you can't anything like that, please use the chat. However, I would like to ask everyone to use the Q&A box that you will find on your bottom of the Zoom window for all technical content related questions so that they'd be at one place and no questions would be lost and you would be able to get we would be able to get your question at the Q&A session. So just a quick introduction to Forum. Forum, as you know, is a nonprofit organization, a membership organization. We're supporting the advancement of open science policies and practices in research communities and institutions across the Arab world. We stand for supporting the advancements of the open science ecosystem in higher educations and research institutions across the Arab world. We'd like to create accessible and localized resources relating to the implementation of the open science policies and practices. And we encourage collaborative communities, partnerships, and cooperations, as well as champion the right to left functionality in key open science sources and open science technological solutions. Our vision is to unlock research for and in the Arab region and work towards a more open world, while our mission is to support the advancements of open science practices, as I said, and by facilitating the exchange of actionable insights and the development of practical policies. Our network so far includes more than 18, where I think we're a bit more than 19 members with 5,000, with more than 5,000 individuals across more than 200 institutions and across more than 110 countries. We do offer capacity building solutions with the localized research library, a Diamond Open Access Journal, the community development activities as the one that we're in now, and regional research projects. For community building, we care about regional discussion forum, the regional open science newsletter, and a stakeholder priorities framework. As we care about connection and representation, we're connecting local stakeholders with global organizations. We're supporting collaborative multilateral dialogues, participation in global working groups, and providing Arabic translation for global organization. And lastly, signing declarations and joining aligned organizations. Without further ado, I'd like to present today's speakers, Rosalie Lack and Dr. Al-Walid Al-Khaja. Please, the floor is yours. I'm sure everyone wants to listen to you, not me.
Thank you, Mira, for that. Good morning, I guess good afternoon, good evening. I mean, I think we're all at different locations. But anyways, my name is Al-Walid. I'm the head of open access and copyright at Qatar National Library. I'm really happy to be here today. And, thank you, Mira, for the introduction. And we're really happy to be kicking off the Forum series this year. So we're very happy to be part of that. So I'm joined today by Rosalie Lack from SCOSS. And Rosalie and I have been working together for some time. We know each other, and it's really great to be having a webinar together. The last time we did something was at the Forum conference back in October. So I'm very happy that we're doing this again. And I'm very excited that, so to be moderating this session. Rosalie will tell us more about open infrastructure and SCOSS, and then we'll have kind of a discussion later on. And yeah, Rosalie, to you for.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you so much for agreeing to moderate and for presenting, Alba Lead. And I do want to also say, yes, that we met at the Forum conference in UAE last year. And for anyone who is considering attending that conference, I highly recommend it. It was really a great conference. And I appreciated the talks that were there and the people that I met. So highly recommend that. Check their website, see where their next conference is going to be. It's really worth the visit. So today I'm going to start off with a little lighter uh, a little lighter note to test out a tool here we have. I'd love for folks to, we're going to put in the chat this URL and just let us know, like, what's the weather like where you are? I actually love to know about weather. And I know that seems funny, but I love knowing what the weather is. So I would love for folks to just take a few minutes, let me know what you're experiencing with the weather, and we're going to see what that looks like with as the presentation goes through. So let's see what, okay, we got a little bit of sun happening. Anybody experiencing rain, or is it all just the sunny world? And I'm really curious if anyone is experiencing snow. I would be interested to know that. So yeah, go ahead and click the link. It should be in the chat, and let us know what your weather is where you are. I don't know. Alali, did you do your weather already?
I think it's sunny. So maybe we should have like cloudy as well, because I think it's gonna be rain, but we're not sure yet.
Okay. Well, if it's sort of cloudy, then it should be under rainy, I guess. Okay. So I'm curious if folks are having problems doing this because we do have a serious question after this one that we'd love to get your input on. So, okay, there's a little bit of rain.
But what's the
Okay.
weather for you, Rosalie, right now?
Right now it's nighttime, so so it's a little sunny.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to see that people are able to use the tool, so maybe I will. A lot of sunshine is what I'm seeing and no snow, so that's good. I approve of that. So the next question, more on topic, is I would love to have folks, just as we're getting started, I know today we're going to be talking about this topic, but if you, before we get going, if you could let me know in one word, when you think of open infrastructure, what words come to your mind? And you can put the word open. That's a good word to put. But if you put open, try to put another word also. So it's one word per answer, and you could put as many as you like. So just to kind of see what people are thinking about, what comes to mind to people when they think about open infrastructure. And I think Mira has put this link also in the chat. So you should be able to just click on that link in the chat and then just come up with words that come to mind to you when you think about open infrastructure. And okay, great. I like these ones. Free to use, sharing, equitable, collaborative, important. I like that word. It's a good one. Connection for the community, sharing, um, more, let's see, accessible just came in. That's nice. Transparent. Yeah, these are a lot of terms. Vital. Oh, I like that one. These are great to see these terms. These are a lot of things that I'm going to be talking about today. So it's good to see this understanding, and that's your perception of open infrastructure. Vital, free to use, important. Ooh, important is coming back again. I like it. I like it. Yeah, if you see a word there you really like, go ahead and vote again, and so we can see what pops up. I'll give it another just 30 seconds or so to see if any other terms come up. For the community, transparent, that's a good one. Sharing, okay. Any other terms come into mind? I think all of these terms that really speak to what we're going to be talking about today, so this is great. Mm.
These are amazing. I think we're
I
up for a
know
good
this is
start,
really,
huh?
it's sort of fun to see them come up. I'm just thinking of something new. Sharing, yes. sharing is a good one also. That definitely is what speaks to open infrastructure, of these values of community and collaboration and equitable and vital and free to use. Wonderful. Okay. All right. So I'm going to keep that up. If anyone thinks about other words to put down, we'll check it again later, maybe at the end of our presentation. So but I love all those terms, and I think that really sets a nice stage for what we're going to be doing today. So that's wonderful. So I will, so this is our agenda for today. We're going to have an introduction to the Qatar National Library by Al Walid, talking about their open access. And then I'm going to be talking about definitions and examples. And then I am going to give you a 5-minute break so that you have a little chance to get coffee or tea or stretch. And then we're back for the second half to talk about funding models and this overview of SCOSS and how to invest. And then we'll have a chance for Q&A at the very end. So think about questions as you think of the questions, put them in the Q&A, or we'll gather them also at the end. So. Okay. So let's start at the beginning. Over to you, Al Walid.
Thanks, Rosalie. And kind of the workload is amazing. I think we're really up for a good start, and I think so it's very exciting. So what I want to talk about is Qatar National Library, and what I want to kind of emphasize just before I start talking about QNL is that open infrastructure is a global issue, right? It's a global kind of topic, and it impacts basically everybody in the world, everybody who's in kind of working in open science. And it kind of, we're trying to address many different stakeholders here, from libraries like ourselves to funders to research administrators, research institutions, everybody who's using open infrastructure. So we'll hear more about that in a bit. But with QNL, I just want to say that it's basically an example or a use case of open infrastructure. And the point of talking about QNL, one is I love talking, so I always going to take an opportunity to speak about QNL and what I do. But again, it's just to give an idea of one use case of a stakeholder, right? So when you look at open science in Qatar, we basically have different kind of different initiatives. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So basically, from our perspective, we're really involved in open science, and we try to support open science in different ways. Now, there are different initiatives by QNL. There's like initiatives at Qatar University. We have some open access publishers, and of course, the Qatar Research and Development Innovation Council. If you can go to the next slide, I can tell you more about what QNL does, right? So Qatar National Library, we have an open access program. And what we do is we have different agreements with publishers so that Qatar-based researchers are not required to pay publishing fees. Now, we're trying to address kind of a critical issue, and when it comes to open access publishing, is that authors don't have enough funding. Now, of course, open access isn't. I mean, when open science isn't just open access, then it's much bigger. So one of the things we're also doing is we have a national research repository called Manara. And what we do with Manara is we collect, preserve, provide access to a variety of research outputs, including data sets, open access publications, preprints, and also non-traditional academic outputs, which normally wouldn't have a home elsewhere. So we have the repository. And again, when we talk about open infrastructure, just kind of keep that in mind. And when we talk about kind of open science and openness in general, it's not just research. It's not like your typical academic research articles, etc. There's much more. We also deal with kind of the topic of open heritage. So we have the Qatar Digital Repository, and we have about 200,000 items that's growing of maps, archives. So when we talk about infrastructure, it's there. So one thing I kind of want to also mention is that we're developing a new repository for our public heritage or for our heritage collection. And it's going to be DSpace based. So we're going to be using DSpace. And that's one of the infrastructure that we'll hear more about today. And yeah, so we'll hear more about kind of DSpace. And basically, this is something as an example, in all the different things we do, we rely on open infrastructure. So when it comes to the open access program, we rely on tools such as, like the looking at what licenses are out there, what authors can do with publishing and like on the repository, the DOAJ, for example, and of course, the different platforms that we use to support our different initiatives. And I briefly talk about like the other initiatives in the country. So the Qatar University also have a repository. And if you look at the next slide, basically their repository is also based on DSpace. So again, the idea that, and that not only us at KNL, but also one of the biggest public university in Qatar uses an open infrastructure for the repository. And this is not just limited to libraries. So if you look at the next slide, in open access publishing in Qatar, we have two publishers, HBQ Press with their platform Q Science and Qatar University Press. Both of them also rely on open infrastructure. So Qatar University, for example, uses OGS, or the Open Journal Systems from the PKP project, and also rely on the different tools to support kind of how they do publishing. And finally, if we look at even the QRDI portal, even though in the last, sorry, one more slide, basically QRDI portal, it's a new initiatives by the Qatar Research and Development Council. And again, they're publishing data sets and publications, but to do this, they also rely on different tools and systems. So what I want to say as using QNL as just a use case and as an example, and if we go to the next slide, is that open science in Qatar needs open infrastructure solutions, whether it's the libraries like Ask QNL, whether we do it for the open access funding, or the repositories, the different repositories that we have, Qatar University repositories, or the publishers, or even like the research funders. We all rely on these different infrastructure, different tools, different platforms, different services. And the question that I want you to think about today is, what if we don't have any of those? So imagine a world without open infrastructure. Where will we be today, right? And that's just something I want to keep in mind. And like, just what would happen if we lose all these services or they didn't exist in the beginning? How does open science look like? How does our work look like? Of course, will be impacted. And this is something that we want to dig into deeper today. And with that, I look forward to hearing more about kind of open infrastructure from Rosalie and what SCOSS does. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Ali, for sharing that overview of what you're doing, and thank you for the work that you're doing. So appreciate that. So I'm going to take us back to really kind of back to basics, as it were, by making sure that everyone is on the same page with definitions and understanding. As we described this webinar, we said it was going to be, what is open infrastructure, and how does it, why does it matter? How does it get funded? So we are going to really take it back to the basics and go through those to make sure that we're all on the same page with that. And just again, I think I might not have introduced myself earlier. I'm Rosalie Lack. I'm the SCOSS coordinator, and I will be giving you an overview of what SCOSS is as we go along through this presentation. But first, let's start with these definitions. I'm sure many of us here obviously know what open access is, but in case someone doesn't, I want to make sure we're all on the same page and have a shared understanding of all of these terms. So so I'm assuming you can see my screen fine. I should have asked that question. Okay, great. So open access is, who can read the research. So this refers to specifically to free and online availability of research outputs, such as peer-reviewed journals or books, and versus open science, which at times you will hear the term open research. They're somewhat used interchangeably. It's kind of a broader term that refers to the broader movement aimed at making in the kind of the entire scientific process more accessible. It's about transparency and collaboration and sharing all aspects of research. It's more about how research is created. And then the third term, which of course is what we're going to focus on most of this presentation on, is open infrastructure. And these are the systems that make open access and open science possible. So again, just briefly to get us all on the same page, I want it to be understood the benefits because these terms and the benefits are all intertwined. So, for example, with open access, you can see these slides, and these slides will be available later, or you can always contact me if you're not finding them. But so don't feel you have to write all of these down. But I want to just give you a sense of some of the benefits of open access. For example, free and immediate access to research removes financial, and in the case of open infrastructure, technical barriers for readers, researchers, students, but also the general public are able to access this content when it's open access. It also can lead to greater visibility. Open research is discoverable beyond a single platform, so increasing readership, citations, real-world impact. We have enhanced collaboration between researchers, easier to work with each other. There's broader access to knowledge. More people can actually contribute to knowledge because there's more ability to empower and to share information that is openly available. And then last but not least, cost savings, that by reducing dependency on expensive subscription models, open access helps institutions to manage their budgets more sustainably. So we have these kind of benefits all around the larger open access movement. And if we think on the terms of the benefits of open science, again, many of these are related benefits, but in particular, for example, transparency, which I saw on our word cloud earlier, very true, that it ensures openness for the research process. So transparency makes the methods, the data decisions visible so that you can trust the research that you'll be building on. It also helps with reproducibility because there's more trustworthiness and reproducible research because you have open access to the data, to the code, to the methods, this thus allowing for reproducibility of this of findings. Accelerated innovation will occur when research outputs are more open or reusable, new ideas emerge, as researchers and developers are able to combine existing work with other research. Do you have a question,
No,
Ali?
just Rosalie on the slide, if it's possible to maximize the screen because I think some of like the just on the right side is a bit cut. So if we can,
Oh,
yeah, there you go. It's perfect. It's better now.
sorry about that.
No worries. Thanks so much. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, no, my fault. Sorry, so we're talking about, oh yeah, let me get back to collaboration and then more inclusivity. So open systems allow for diverse participation. I'm just trying to make sure. So all these benefits I've just gone through, which sound wonderful, accelerated research, more citations, more access for more people, all of that and all those benefits really comes down to open science, however, is only as open as the infrastructure that it runs on. So the idea that you could have open access and open science and all this, but actually the systems running those materials could be closed or controlled by a few actors. And so in essence, it isn't truly open. And this is why when we talk about open infrastructure, it isn't just technical, it's really foundational to open access and open science. So I want to just spend a few more minutes digging into some definitions of open infrastructure because I think many of us think of infrastructure as we see plumbing or highways or freeways. That's infrastructure, the things that we know we depend on every day and we don't notice them until they don't work. But there's other kind of nuances to complexity to open infrastructure that I really want to get into today to understand. So in SCOSS, we talk about open infrastructure as services that are non-commercial, community-governed services that are essential to open science and require collective funding. So we have this the key insight from the SCOSS is this definition of sustainability comes from collective responsibility. So open infrastructure services are essential to open science, but they're essential that they be supported by the community. And SCOSS really kind of reframes infrastructure support, not as a charity or a possible optional sponsorship, but as a shared responsibility that by pooling resources, all stakeholders can contribute and benefit from this system. And another definition that is probably one many have seen is with UNESCO and their documentation, where they talk about open infrastructure as that are shared, publicly accessible systems, that they can be technical infrastructure or social infrastructure or even organizational infrastructure that enable the production, sharing, reuse, and evaluation of scientific knowledge in line with open science principles. So again, this idea that open science and open access need to be built on open infrastructure is very important here in this definition and clearly stated here. So something that I'm not going to go into in detail, but I wanted to put them in the slides here so that you can see them. This Principles of Open Scholarly Infrastructure, or POSI. This is a framework that has been developed, and why this framework matters. It's really a self-assessment framework that infrastructures use this framework to self-assess if they are meeting the POSI standards and principles. And why this matters is that because in a way it sort of protects the community investment. So it ensures that open infrastructure remains open and durable over time. That's because this infrastructure is asking questions like, are you transparent? Is your data freely available? Are you using open source? Do you have a succession plan? If for some reason the director you have now is no longer the director, what is your succession plan? So it really requires of infrastructures to ask tough questions and to self-assess and be at a certain level of meeting these POSI standards. So just so you know that in the community there is a framework where open infrastructure self-assess and meet these high level principles. And so in their definition, it's they really are looking at the idea of that it's who's controlling the infrastructure should be governed by the community and operated transparently. And these principles focus on that the shift is that it's not just tools, but really who makes the decision and who sets the priorities. And that's how you can have a sense of the strength of that open infrastructure. So. And finally, in this kind of definitions world, I think this slide nicely summarizes what I've been talking about. So I just really want to stress this idea that open infrastructure isn't just a tool. It is that, it's a tool, but it's also a commitment to this shared purpose and this long-term impact. That if we want these benefits of open science, of open access that we've just been going through, transparent by default, affordable by design, accessible to all, collective by nature, and collaborative by nature, interoperable and open, all of these qualities, this is this the world that we want? Do we want this world of open science, open access, open infrastructure? They go hand in hand, and I, of course, advocate that we do want this world. So just leaving these definitions to be clear of what these various parts are about. So, and talking a lot about open infrastructure, but let me give you some examples. And we started out with Al-Walid giving some examples of what they're using at QNL. So what we have here is is what we call the SCOSS family. And I know I still haven't given you the SCOSS overview, but you'll get it, don't worry. So the SCOSS family, these are 19 infrastructures that have been chosen and vetted and selected because they are essential and because they have strong governance, strong strategic plans. They have they have community input, all these qualities that the POSI qualities that we talked about. Their data is open, they're free to use at the point of use. We'll talk more about that. And so these 19 infrastructures really are the ones you want to be looking closely at for sure as ones that are essential to the research life cycle. And they represent a broad global footprint, the Americas and Europe and Africa. And so as I'm going to kind of go through a little description of each of these, but I'm not going to stop at each one of them because we don't have time for that. So I'm going to really focus on the ones that are most recent, but I want to just give you a sense of what kinds of activities these open infrastructures do that are essential to the research life cycle. So, for example, in this case, these are different repositories, and we heard about DSpace for sure, and I'm sure that's one that's very familiar to many of you. Archive and Dryad, these are other ones that you should definitely take a look. And again, these slides and the URLs will all be shared with you. Other examples are here on this slide. I wanted to focus on, again, just the newer ones that have joined us, which you may not be as familiar with. So, for example, Software Heritage is a newer infrastructure for us, and very interesting. You know, the same way we're research output is books and journals, and now it's data. And the newest thing, of course, is software. So people have software code, and it needs to be curated and preserved. And that's exactly what Software Heritage does. And I think it's an amazing service. So for those of us who would, and I'm a digital librarian by training, who would, even for us, this is a very difficult thing to curate and preserve, but they have solved that problem. And so if you have software code that you need preserved and want to learn more about it, that is definitely the place to be. Another example are infrastructures that are like directories or indexes. And I think Al-Walid made reference to Open Policy Finder, something that's used heavily in when you're licensing and purchasing, making purchasing agreements. And we also have infrastructures that work in the space of monographs. So in this case, these are two very important infrastructures, one an index and one freely available academic books, and very large collections, all peer-reviewed and vetted collections, so you can be confident of the quality. And then in the publishing world, we've got quite a few examples with each doing having a unique space in this world. And so, for example, Agile is a platform for publishing across the African continent, which of course includes North Africa also. So it could be very much of interest to folks in this audience, hopefully. Take a look. They offer platform publishing. And not only do they have a platform for publishing, they actually have a lot of support to help with publishing. If you have questions, how do I start a journal? What do I need? What's the quality? They're there to help you to walk through that process, and that's what they do. And PKP, of course, many of you may be familiar with OJS as running your journals publishing. And other publishing examples, for example, SciPost is a publisher of scientific journals, again, peer-reviewed scientific journals. And another aspect of the research life cycle is research assessment. So to be thinking about, for example, when you write an article and you want to know how many people cite it, but what about if you have your data and you make your data available? You'd want to know how many people use it, how many people cite it. And so that is what Make Data Count is taking care of. They're thinking about that. How can we do that so that data sets can be counted and cited like journal articles or anything else. So a very interesting initiative doing really interesting work on how to standardize citations and usage of data sets. And we also have organizations, like I said, there were infrastructure that's organizational infrastructure, and this is Research Data Alliance, RDA is that kind of example. Anything to do with data usage and data sharing, they have a community of people. So their infrastructure is like a community of people who come together to help each other to learn about data sharing and reuse and everything around that. Encourage you to take a look at them also. And then finally, identifiers are big. One of our infrastructures is identifiers for research organizations in the way that ORCID is for people, ROARs are for institutions, for to have identifiers. So that quick view through all the infrastructures, and again, I didn't stop on all of them, but you get a sense of how they're the variety of things that they're doing. And this slide is just giving us sort of a summation of all those infrastructures and some of their impact, global impact. They're used across the globe, and a number of users and data sets and citation data is really quite impressive to show that how much of the kind of how much usage that these infrastructures have. So I'm going to turn now to equality about infrastructures. It's very important with called interoperability, which I'm sure many folks know this term, but why I'm stuck on this is that one of the main benefits of open infrastructure is this ability to be interoperable with other systems. And so they don't, all those 19 infrastructures that I showed you, they work together with each other and are willing to work together, are interested to work together because by their very nature, they are open standards and the idea is that they can easily connect because they are by design open, based on open standards and open source. So there's another term that you can hear, intraoperability. So I just want to be clear to not be confused with those. So intraoperability is when you have one platform and within one single system, everything works together. So for example, you may have one vendor where all of their tools all work together. Now that's great, but that's not interoperable with outside of their system. And so that's the most important and one of the biggest benefits of it open infrastructure is this ability to work with other infrastructures and achieve efficiencies that way. So the efficiency of interoperability is a local efficiency versus interoperability, which is across the entire ecosystem of infrastructures. So, for example, this diagram here, which you can, if you click on this link, well, you can't, if you see this link, you could go to this, this is an interactive data visualization, and it's showing these infrastructures in the middle with the blue circle around them. Those are the SCOSS infrastructures. And then the larger open infrastructure ecosystem is around it. And you can see these connections are how they all work together. They work on different projects or they exchange metadata. So it's a highly interconnected system. Again, because they are open infrastructures, they can be that way and be efficient that way. And that helps provide benefits to the end users, that things are, you don't have to know all those systems. You just have to know the ones that are that you're familiar with, and then those you can get through to other systems because they're interconnected with the ones that you're using. And smoother workflows for publication, and a greater visibility and recognition because because they're interoperable with each other, and a better use of community resources because there's less duplication and increased in efficiency of how they're working with each other. So on that point, I think I do want to just go back and and have you take a look at this. Again, if you can, maybe, I don't know, Mira, if you could put this URL in the chat box, that would be really great, and folks could take a look at that, just to see these different infrastructures and give you a sense of the variety of what they do. And okay, so I think our next thing is I was going to give you guys a little bit of a break here. So I'm I was gonna do you think this is a good time, Ali, to go ahead and have a break, or should we
I think yeah. I mean, we
yeah.
can have a couple of minutes break, and then I guess once we come back, we'll look about kind of funding challenges and kind of know more about SCOSS. I think it's a good segue to kind of take a little break. And in the meantime, maybe we can share the link here. Let me just put it so then people could just look more about SCOSS while in the break or have some coffee.
Yes, go and have some coffee and think about the questions. I mean, I gave you a lot of information, so think about any questions you might have about the benefits of open access, open science, and the differences. And
Yeah, so I've just shared the link on the webinar chat. So please go ahead, look at the SCOSS family, try to navigate to the SCOSS website, and and then again, if you have any questions, please add them in the Q&A box, and we'll come to them later on. Thanks so much.
okay, so we'll just have you a little break here. Okay, so we're going to be coming back together. I know folks don't always get a break in webinars, but I always think it's so nice to just, I got a chance to get some tea and a little refreshed. So I'm glad we had it. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go ahead and pick back up where we were. And I'm going to be moving into, oops, I make my screen is, I have to get my screen back here. Okay, great. So I will just be, this is where we are in the agenda. I'm going to be talking about the different funding models and challenges, and then moving through an intro to SCOSS and on from there. So, in the first half, I talked a lot about all these benefits for open access, and it's freely available, it's free to use. Um, you know, but how does that, so it's great that it sounds so wonderful, it's all free, but in fact it's not free to operate. So we want to be really clear with this free to use at the point of use for the end user. So any of those infrastructures that I went through quite quickly earlier, you can go to them today and use them for free. That's what open infrastructure means. But they are not free to operate. So if these are nonprofit, non-commercial open infrastructures, who pays for them? How does this work? So um, I've gathered here a slide of different ways that open infrastructure can be funded and is funded because they're non-commercial. They are never going to be charging the end user to use their core data. So how do they get funded? They are sustained usually in a number of ways. And one of the main ways is through institutional membership and sponsorship. So um, institutions will become members or sponsors and regularly contribute to that infrastructure to help them with their operating funds. They also may be funded by public funding or government funding that would kind of national or regional support that can be a funding source. Some infrastructures are hosted in a larger university or a larger organization that give them either funding or at least in-kind backing or cash backing, depending on the host institution. And another way is they may also be getting foundation or project grants. So these are usually time-limited funding to do some special development or some special innovation. And another way is through in-kind contributions. We'll talk a little bit about that before we end here, but that people might give staff time or office space or some kind of in-kind contribution to help these open infrastructures. There are some infrastructures that actually do charge some service fees. It's never for the core data or the core information, because that would in fact be a violation of the POSI principles, which really require that the core data be openly available, but you may add value added services on top. Then there may be charges for that. And also, another way is publisher partnerships. Some infrastructures partner with publishers and get financial support in that way. And then finally, gifts or donations from individuals or institutions. So it's a variety of ways they may be funded. Some of these ways bring with them their own challenges. So, for example, there are challenges common across these infrastructures, but they're not challenges because there's some sort of bad management or something. It's sort of structural challenges that many of them start as projects, and they have to then transition into platforms or services. And so going from project funding to program funding can be a challenge and for many infrastructures. Another issue that becomes a problem is that, frankly, maintenance isn't compelling. So the idea is they may get funding to do some really interesting, innovative project, but very few funders, foundations or others who might fund research, are as interested to fund maintenance or ongoing operations of these infrastructures. So it really requires, that becomes a challenge if they're not getting enough funding from those who are using the infrastructures, which leads to our next point, that there is definitely a free rider problem. And what that means is not that so people, the idea of the free rider problem is that for infrastructures that are used by institutions that are fully resourced and are able to pay for those infrastructures but don't, that's the free rider problem. It isn't an institution or a country that is low resource, that is not able to pay, that doesn't. That's not the free rider. It's for well-resourced institutions who don't fund at full capacity these open infrastructures that they're using. And then just looking through a couple of these ones that are related to this idea of mission locked limited revenue levers, because they are non-commercial, they intentionally do not have revenue models, because that would conflict with their values of what they're trying to do, which is to be completely open. And so by their very nature, they can't charge for what their services are. So they're always having to look for different ways to get funding, and that's the challenge that they're facing. So and this leads into what SCOSS is about, is that the goal is to really normalize funding these infrastructures, making it, as I say here, intentional, that that open infrastructures don't sustain themselves. In order to be reliable and independent and community controlled, and to keep this, what we like about these benefits, they need predictable support. And sustainability needs to be budgeted for, so that they can, make their own plans and have predictable incomes. Sorry. Um, and I'm just having a problem with my screen here. Apologies here. And so when they are, it creates an underfunding risk when there's gaps in what they need to be funded. For example, if they are not getting the funding they need, we've seen actually commercial acquisition of many of these infrastructures. That was happening several years ago. There were many open infrastructures that were in fact then purchased by commercial entities. And so what ends up happening is that we, the community, end up paying more for these infrastructures that once we paid less for, but then once they're purchased or acquired by vendors, then the price is going to go up. I mean, that's just what happens as they increase the costs of using them from free to the commercial costs. So the idea is to not wait till these infrastructures are acquired or are having uh, disruption in service or any of that, but rather to normalize funding them and to make that intentional as we fund any other resource that we use. So, so that's where SCOSS comes in as a model for how to fund these kinds of resources. So SCOSS um, is a model of how to fund these resources. It's a nonprofit organization, and their aim is to help sustain vital, non-commercial, open infrastructure that supports the implementation of open science. And each of these words are important in the sense that this infrastructure is essential or vital. I think someone said the word vital in the word cloud earlier. Exactly. And they are non-commercial. They're open, of course, and we strongly believe, as I started out with this presentation, that open science must be built on open infrastructure. So that's the aim of SCOSS, is to help sustain this open infrastructure. And SCOSS is a global organization that has a reach that's a global reach and impact. And so this is the different organizations that work with us from all across the world. And to understand the SCOSS model of how all this works is that first we identify and then endorse infrastructures that are critical for open science. So how that works is that open infrastructures apply to SCOSS every year to become SCOSS endorsed infrastructures. So those infrastructures I showed you earlier, those were all SCOSS endorsed infrastructures. So we at SCOSS review them with our expert advisory group and board, and we're looking at all aspects of these infrastructures, with their governance, their financial health, their community engagement, their strategic planning. And after this kind of rigorous vetting process, we select 2 to 4 infrastructures a year. And once they're endorsed, then SCOSS facilitates the relationship between those who could fund these infrastructures and the infrastructures themselves. The idea is that SCOSS does not give out funds. We're not a funder, nor do we take in funds. We are a facilitator between the funder who could fund an infrastructure and the infrastructures, with the goal that we will help to make that relationship between the two parties, and that will continue long term after the SCOSS. Well, you're always a member of the SCOSS family, but that they continue long term. And so our mission is, like I say, to really mainstream funding of infrastructure like any other service you might rely on. It's not one-time support needed, but to really advocate for mainstreaming that support. And SCOSS does also helps with getting this funding, but we also help the infrastructures we support them with capacity building and other sustainability practices, so that it's about how to raise funds for them, but how to help them sort of thrive over time. So it's this two-part process that we work with infrastructures on. So you can know when you see this SCOSS kind of seal that you know that the infrastructures are non-commercial for sure. They're open. They have been rigorously evaluated. They're essential for the open science ecosystem. They're global, widely used, community-driven, and transparent governance and accountability. So all these, again, principles of the alignment with the POSI principles. But when these infrastructures are been SCOSS selected, then you know that this is what you're getting. And again, these are the infrastructures currently that are SCOSS endorsed infrastructures. I invite you to take a look at any of them. If you're not familiar with any, please do take a look and familiarize yourself with them. So the idea is that I'm working up to my case that we need investment. Not we SCOSS, but the open science ecosystem needs to be supported. So even though these, as we say, these open infrastructures are free at the point of use, they are not free to operate. So what is the goal of SCOSS is to help to normalize this funding process. And one way to think about how you could invest strategically is one way is you could start with the SCOSS recommendation. You know, these are community vetted, trusted open infrastructures. So you take a look at these infrastructures and you can assess how they might fit in with your institutional fit, what's relevant for your researchers, for you as a researcher, and then align them with your strategies and values and select the infrastructures that best fit your values, fit your needs, knowing that any of the ones that are SCOSS recommended are have already been vetted. That being said, there are many quality open infrastructures that are not yet SCOSS endorsed because we only select one or two a year. So there may be other ones, but the idea is this is one suggestion to start with the SCOSS. Of course, I'm a little biased as I work with SCOSS, but the point is really to sit down and look at these infrastructures. What are you using on a regular basis and how can you support them? And the idea is to invest intentionally, to support them by putting it into your regular budgets, and not just one day, one year we pay, one year we don't, but really putting a regular budget item to support these open infrastructures that you're using. Because as Al-Walid said earlier when we first started, imagine if they were gone. You know, you're really dependent on DSpace, and what if something happens and there's no more DSpace and the upgrades aren't happening like you're used to, for example? It really, those things really need funding to continue to be growing and innovating. So, and when we talk about funding, these are kind of the levels. So in the SCOSS model, we have for 3 years, once an infrastructure is chosen, we do this kind of intensive fundraising for them, as it were, or fundraising awareness. And these are the levels of funding that we recommend that the infrastructures use. So you can see starting from 500 for a small institution up to 2,000 annually for 3 years. And I should point out, you know, one APC article processing charge can be $1,000 or $2,000. So it's not exorbitant amounts of money. But this is again is just levels that SCOSS recommends. Each infrastructure is somewhere within this order, some more, maybe some even less. You'd work directly with the infrastructures, but this just gives you an idea of the funding level. Which the point being is that we're a part of a community, and if everyone just gives a small amount, then the support will be there overall for these infrastructures. And yeah, I guess I just wanted to bring back this visualization to show you again how all these infrastructures are interconnected, and to keep in mind the idea that whether you're supporting one of the SCOSS ones or one of the other non-commercial infrastructures from that visualization, that think about when you're supporting one of those, you're really supporting them all because they are so closely interconnected and interwoven, again, by design as they're interoperable for efficiency. So think of the idea that your collective funding ensures that this open community-led infrastructure remains viable and remains an option for research, and thus keeping open all these benefits. Again, going back to the beginning of my talk about transparency and equity and all these benefits of open access and open science that we all would like to see. Let's bring those also to the open infrastructure and to keep those open in order to realize all those benefits. And I think I'm close to wrapping up here with my slides. I do want to make one last point here about how to contribute. So I've talked a lot about funding, which of course, giving funding for these infrastructures is very important. But I also want to make the point that there's other ways to contribute to these infrastructures. For example, advocating for open infrastructure, maybe at your institution, helping them to see the importance of open infrastructure and why it does help to build a resilient open ecosystem. Promoting the visibility. If there's one that you particularly like to use, you tell your colleagues and tell others about it. Many of you for example, are leaders in your community, maybe consider joining or serving on a working group or joining the board of one of these open infrastructures. That's another way to contribute and make sure that they're supported with your expertise, for example. Um, some other ideas here, rethinking in general how your institution funds science and research, and helping to make the case to shift budgets toward open access and toward open infrastructure in order to realize this vision of an open ecosystem that we're working toward. And yeah, I think these are all some of these great ideas that we can all be thinking about as other ways to support that are beyond funds. So on that note, I leave my contact information and on SCOSS website information. Follow us on social media and definitely reach out to me if you have any questions. I think I'm going to turn it back over to Al Walid. We're going to just have
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
yeah.
That's really great that
That was a lot of information, huh?
but it's great because you painted a picture, what is open infrastructure, the funding model, why we need it. And again, I want to go back to what we mentioned at the beginning. Imagine a world without open infrastructure. I don't want to imagine that world. I don't think it's going to be a good world for open science. And yes, please, for everybody at the webinar right now, please drop your questions in the question and answer box, and we'll come to them. I do have some questions, but maybe before that, I just want to say, also please reach out to SCOSS if you have any kind of comments, feedback about open infrastructure, not necessarily a question. If we think, for example, why should we fund or why should we be funding, and kind of any questions, I think that's something going to be welcomed by SCOSS. Any feedback. I'm not kind of stepping into saying something wrong here, but I think that yeah, any feedback from you to SCOSS would be helpful. Um, Now I do have some questions for you, Rosalie, and so I'll start with those, and then we'll see how the Q&A develops. You've mentioned, for example, the importance of funding, right? And the idea that just because something is free to use doesn't mean it doesn't need money and doesn't mean it need money to sustain, etc. Now we know that open infrastructure basically it's benefited, or I mean, many different stakeholders benefit from open infrastructure. So maybe the first question is who should be responsible for this? And like who should be responsible from the different stakeholders? Who should be responsible for funding open infrastructure? Is it governments, funders, libraries, individuals? I mean, not individuals, but researchers, the research community, or is it all of the above? I know in SCOSS you have different funding models of what is recommended. So maybe you can comment more about that, about the responsibility of funding.
Yeah, I do think, thanks for that question. I do think it is all of the above. I do think that that's one thing that we've really seen at SCOSS and over the years. It is a collective responsibility that it's for everyone to support. We'd love for governments to get more involved, but we don't want it to be just government funded. That's can become problematic if they have all the levers and the control too. So in a way, the diversification of the funding is also the strength. So you want, yeah, government funders. I'd love to see foundations looking more to funding operations and not just projects. So larger, philanthropic foundations to be funding more, research funders to fund more. Um, but also institutions and libraries and universities that are using these resources that depend on them, that they also would fund. And then this idea of funding, that it's intentional, that's in the budget, and every year you're funding at whatever level is comfortable for you, I think is important. We don't work too much at SCOSS with individuals funding. In fact, we don't work at all with individuals funding. But I think there are many infrastructures, like when you're on Wikipedia, for example, I've funded that many a time once I've used it because I feel grateful for the information that's there. Or Internet Archives, another great infrastructure you might want to fund. But so we don't really think too much about the individual at this point, but they also have a contribution to make, as small as it might seem. So
I like how, for example, like for individuals who want support, what they can do doesn't mean necessarily money. They can provide other support. Even just talking about the topic, even like a small something, like contribution on social media, kind of just
yes.
talking about
Yeah.
it. That's
I
I
mean,
think
yeah,
that goes a long way.
you use DSpace or you use DOAJ and you love them, do a post on social media, spread the word about them, so increased usage of these is a good thing. So yeah, definitely.
And I guess, and on the SCOSS website, one can actually see who has contributed, like basically so far. And so maybe just kind of going back to my question between governments and funders. I mean, so far, who has been supporting more, and is there like a stakeholder you would like to, I mean, like SCOSS to see like contributing more to funding?
Well, in the SCOSS model, the funders that have really funded the most are library consortia. So these are, you know, for those who are not in the library world, so libraries get together and they join a library consortium. And so there might be 10 or 20 or 30 libraries. And then so we work rather than having to work with 30 individual libraries, we work with the consortium and they in turn work with the libraries. And that's actually a really good, strong model for SCOSS and has worked pretty well. But we still need more of those. I would love to see more of them. I actually would like to see the research funders step up and fund more. We haven't seen as much of that as we should, but I think because their model of funding projects and not operations is, and they will say too, we've met with many of them and tried to explain, and they say, well, we don't do operations, and so someday maybe they will change their funding models to be able to fund the ongoing operations because that's essentially what we need to have happen. So I'd like to see more research funders definitely step up.
I'm guessing the key is to kind of plan strategically, as you mentioned, even for funders, because maybe they don't have enough flexible or they may not be doing this as part of their normal kind of business, is to kind of reach out to them and talk with them and convince them to add it to their budgets. I mean, just because they haven't done so or not doing it right now doesn't mean that they can't do it in the future. So I think that's something that, kind of the community can push for. Um,
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think at SCOSS, we're an advocacy organization, so we do a lot of advocating for this cause. But it's also the community has to be also be making their voice heard. So yes, thank you.
uh,
Yeah.
Maybe a question about the funding amounts and stuff. And it's really, I mean, you're right, the APC and article processing charge used to be $1,000 15 years ago. Now it's like 3,000, 4,000, and that's the amount paid for one article, which is crazy. And that's probably, we need another webinar just to talk about those pricing. But it's really nice that, like to kind of point out, one article processing charge could help an infrastructure a long way. And but again, like not everybody can afford APCs as well. And that's another topic. But for those like institutions that, like how, I mean, who may not have enough funding or may not have kind of the budgets available, how can we convince them to pay to infrastructure? And like how would the process work with kind of advocacy or outreach or kind of just convincing them for the value of open infrastructure and ask them to pay? How does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think with anyone and any budget, whether you're a large or small institution, it's the predictability of a budget that's important. And so I think the idea is for if you're a small institution, is to think about maybe this year it's not in your budget or even next year, but think about when you're creating future budgets to look at what you're already paying for, maybe pay less APCs and more open infrastructure. So it's a matter of strategically choosing to support open science. It's a big decision. It's a shift for an organization that it isn't always like, oh, just add more onto your budget, add something else. We also advocate shifting where you're currently spending your funds. Look closely at that and see, what kind of world do you want to live in, basically? Do you want to live in a world of open science, open access, where information is equitable and represents the globe? And if you do, then, maybe not this year or next year, but as you prepare future budgets, plan for change shifting funds to support open access. And for example, I read a great article just the other day, a very hands-on article about this university in Minnesota where they set up a like an open access committee. Like, what do we want to fund? And so, they sat and they met and they all look at all the different infrastructures. They make decisions of how they want to spend, and they get a small, first year, they got a really small allotment of open access money and they funded carefully this and that. And then the next year they got a little bit more. And so, there's ways to slowly start funding. And then, as I said at the end, also, there's ways to support that aren't funding. So and keep that in mind. There's many people who write code for PKP, and without that, it wouldn't be what it is. So, for example, so code writing or joining a board or working group, consider also supporting in other ways that are not financial.
It's very interesting. I mean, we're setting up an open access committee. So I just made a note because we're meeting our first meeting next month, and I just made a note, to maybe talk about the open infrastructure and kind of basically how can the different because basically what we're doing is a committee here from like the major stakeholders of institutions who consume open access funds, and maybe that's something that we can talk. So that's very interesting, and I just made a note to see
Oh,
how
good.
that works. One
Yeah.
thing that we've been kind of experimenting with is, again, when it comes to open access, and again, just to say that open science isn't just open access, but again, when we talk about open science, usually the conversation goes to open access publishing, etc. And one thing maybe what we've been trying to do is we have an open access fund, as I mentioned, and instead of paying the full APC amount to a publisher by processing individual payments, we've been doing like an agreement or a prepayment. Let's say, so instead of paying $3,000 per article for 10 articles, that's $30,000. We have an agreement for 10 articles or whatever, but we get a discount. And one thing that we're trying to explore is how we can use that discounted amount to support open infrastructure. So it's the budget is the same, but the money distribution is different. So we're getting more for the value of the same amount of budget. And that's something we're experimenting with. So if anybody here has kind of any feedback or any kind of similar experiences, I mean, please contact me or contact Rosalie or even add your comment in the chat box here. So that's something very interesting. Moving on, maybe like painting the picture again about the world without open infrastructure. Free to use, but not free to sustain. What would happen if we don't have enough funding? Like, how would that, I mean, I don't want to see that world, but what are the consequences if the community fails to invest adequately in infrastructure? And to put that a bit more in context, I guess what we're seeing is, funding, kind of the trends for funding is changing around the world, right? So countries who are kind of probably traditionally have funded open infrastructure may not be funding moving forward, geopolitics, etc. What would happen? As a community, what would happen? Well, how would we impact infrastructure if we don't act?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think one of the first impacts is the price is going to go up. There's no getting around it. So these infrastructures that many are using free at the point of use for free, and if they are not around, that service will be picked up by a vendor, and the charge will be a lot more. It certainly won't be free, and it'll be a lot more. And so I think the idea of just the bottom line, the prices will go up if we don't support these existing open infrastructures that we're using. There's that for sure. And I think also that I had that whole conversation in my slides about interoperability and the importance of that. And in closed systems, things are not interoperable. Things don't speak to each other. And so that's another risk. If these systems that are open are no longer around, then the alternative are these closed systems where data is not shared, is not freely available, not able to share between different services. So the benefits to the end user will go away. Um, and I do think that all the benefits, again, I started at the beginning of open science, of transparency, of reproducibility, of especially in this time of AI, of all these bots and who knows what's going on out there. The more that we can see into the process of research, the better and deeper the research will be. You know, that someone had a great phrase that was like, open science is not is good research, really is what it is, because it does show the reproducibility and the validation of your results and all these things that go with open science. So I think it's yeah, it's a bleak future. Don't go
Well,
there.
I mean, let's not go there, but that's something that we should be mindful of, right? That's something that, as a community, we need to act together to stop that from happening. But one thing, like, I want to ask is that just because an infrastructure reaches its goal doesn't mean that's the end of all things. It's a continuous thing, right? Right? Even if an infrastructure reaches its targets, that which was kind of communicated or kind of agreed with its costs, doesn't mean that it won't need funding moving forward. Is that right?
Yeah, on the SCOSS model, we asked them to give us a target amount just for this kind of 3-year period that they're with us. But the idea is to change, again, this intentional funding, change to normalize funding them. And so the idea is that that after the 3 years within the SCOSS kind of intensive fundraising period, the funds will continue after that because, yeah, the same way, you know, you pay every year for other things at your library or at your university, any other resource that you use, you have to pay for these every year. You know, I mean, I'm surprised how many people are surprised by that. I was somewhere at a conference and someone said, "Oh, I would totally pay for DOAJ. I didn't even know I could do that." And so there's a lot of educating to do that people even know that it needs funding, but it needs ongoing funding like anything else because they don't have access to like the cash that, you know, a for-profit company has. You know, they can't just charge for their services, otherwise they would no longer be open infrastructure. And so it's sort of by design, they will always be nonprofit. And so we'll have to always depend on the community. And they with that comes this community-led infrastructure that is not in the control of any one vendor. And in some countries, you don't want it in the control of the government either. So they come with it an independence that is particular to these open infrastructures.
And DOJ, I mean, you mentioned, so it's one of the examples that, they've reached this cost targets, but of course they still need funding. So, I mean, we're talking with them also to see how we can support moving forward. So I think that's a good example. Yeah. Again, for the audience here, please add any questions you have. We have one comment from Mace here saying, I mean, we need to educate, or you need to educate academic institutions and accreditation bodies that the quality of such science, I'm guessing referring to open science, is the same as those indexed in paid index platforms. Yeah, I think that's a good comment.
Yeah.
What we try to avoid is that, those infrastructure that we rely on become paywalled, right? That's going to be a bad thing for the community.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of myths and misconceptions still around open access and open infrastructure that somehow the quality is not there, which that is not true. Many articles and many studies have long disproved that. I think I saw some comment earlier about security, or privacy issues. Still personal information. Open data is not open everything. Any personal or privacy concerns, that sort of data would not be open, obviously. So there are limits to open data if it violates a person's privacy, for example. And the same way that um, any systems have their checks against security breaches. Open infrastructure also has those kinds of checks and are not yeah, they have things in place to stop breaches of data and things like that. Like just because they're open doesn't mean they're like literally open as far as open for people to hack them and all that. They have guards in place for that there's a
One,
misconception about that.
100%. And I think it's also important to say that, big commercial companies, big publishers rely on open infrastructure as well. Like
Yes.
DOAJ and the Open Policy Finder, they rely on them. That's really, so I think, I think that's just,
Yeah, a lot of open infrastructures, because they are open, actually vendors are take their data and then can just use it. And by mission, they're like locked into this mission of open data. And so, yes, their data is used by the vendors that you're paying a lot of money for. Just to know that. So they're confident in that data, of course. So, mhm.
Rosa, maybe one more question before we wrap things up. You've talked about SCOSS, the role of what SCOSS does, and you've mentioned, how the selection process, and if you see the SCOSS kind of badge or what the what it actually kind of means, right? So my question is again, just kind of bring that home. If an infrastructure is selected by SCOSS, what does that mean? And what should the community, like when they see the badge or see infrastructure mentioned on the SCOSS website or different communication or online channels, what does that mean for the infrastructure? What does that mean for the community? Is it a call for action? So I thought maybe you can tell us more about that.
Yeah, certainly when an infrastructure applies to SCOSS, they do have to they go through this vetting process, but they also do have to show a need that they have a sustainability concern. That has to be part of it. So any of the infrastructures that are SCOSS infrastructures are on a path to sustainability. So that's happening. That's why they're at SCOSS. And so, but they have been chosen because we know they're highly used, they're highly valuable, they are like essential to the research life cycle. They have excellent governance. They have boards that oversee the work that they do. They have a strategic planning in place. So they have all these elements that make them very strong institutions, but the financial element is not quite there. And so that's what we're helping them with to get to that point of that. So that's why I had this sort of seal of approval. You can know that if it's a SCOSS infrastructure, that it's essential and vital and has really been vetted, but it is one that is in need of financial support. And so that's kind of the one piece, but that doesn't mean that it's a quality infrastructure. It just needs financial support. That's the how they get to be SCOSS infrastructures.
Yeah, sounds good. And I do hope that, from the attendees today that, like if you have any questions, please reach out to SCOSS, but really like um, ask you, to go to the website, read more about it, talk with your, institutions, see which of these infrastructure you're using right now, which one do you rely on, and ask the question, what happens if you don't, right? And I don't know, even if a small amount goes a long way, I think that's again, money, of course, is funding is what the infrastructure needs immediately, urgently, in many cases. But again, there are other ways that Rosalie mentioned that, you can support. And it doesn't necessarily mean paying money. But that's something I do hope that many of you can do. Maybe what do you expect to see kind of moving forward? What is it like with SCOSS? Kind of goals for 2026 and maybe last words and what you would like the community to do.
Yeah, I am going to wrap it up because I know that Mira has
Mm,
a few slides at the
yeah,
end that she wants to share. And I do want to thank you again, Mira and Form, for inviting us to this webinar. It's been really great. And I do put a plug in for their conference. It is an amazing
yeah.
conference. I really enjoyed it, and I might try to go again this year. But as far as for SCOSS, we have another round of infrastructures that have applied to us that we will be announcing later this year. And I think we're going to be continuing to do more advocacy work to help. We've gotten a certain amount of consortia that know how to fund, and I think we need to do a little more hand holding of let me show you how you do it, and so we're going to be doing more of that kind of advocacy work too. So looking forward to 2026.
Well, thank you, Rosalie. I mean, it's been like a really amazing presentation and a pleasure chatting with you today. I think it's really
Yeah,
fun.
actually, it was really fun. So glad that we got to do this. Thank you.
Thanks. Mira.
Yeah.
You're
And
over to you.
well, to start with, allow me to thank both Rosalie and Dr. Al-Walid for your time today, for giving us your time, your knowledge, and sharing with us all about SCOSS and the open the experience in QNL. So so I just want to thank you both so much. And just a couple of slides to wrap it up together. I hope by now you know how much we value your feedback. So if all our attendees can please scan the QR code or click on the link in the chat, just give us a very short, very small survey to fill out a very short, very small survey. That would be very appreciative, and it would help us further develop our community development activities. Also, as we said at the beginning, the forum is an institution, has an institutional membership. It is a free membership. So if you believe that your institution would benefit from such a membership, we do invite you to scan the QR code and fill out the form to join the forum membership. We highly appreciate your interest, and we will get back to you right away. And lastly, if you would like to see what other community development activities are in the cards for us for the rest of the year, we do encourage you to scan the QR code here again in order to check our website, and you can register for all the community development activities already there. And we will be announcing across the year the other activities that we will be also hosting this year. Thank you so much for attending, and thank you so much, Rosalie and Dr. Al-Walid, for your presentation. We highly appreciate your efforts and the time that you've given us today. Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.